Hi there, it's me, Mr. Headley. I'm here in room 164, our aquaponics lab, and normally we would have been in here a lot already for intro to research methods, so that you had some understanding of what we were going to be doing once we actually came into the lab. I'm standing right next to one of our deep water raft grow beds. Deep water because we have here 8 inches of water, and rafts because these are styrofoam rafts, and they have little pods and baskets of coconut coir, which is actually the shredded husk of coconuts. They're this big. And this is what we actually plant everything in to grow. So let me give you a little background here. This is an aquaponic system as opposed to a hydroponic system. In an aquaponic system, the water is being also used by fish. In this case, the fish are in these tanks behind me. And the fish we use are tilapia. You'll see those a lot closer in a little bit. And what we end up doing is that we actually, in this case, plant seeds for the tomatoes here. And for the peppers right here, these are bell peppers. But we can also plant seeds, well, not seeds. We could grow these from seeds, but instead we're growing these from basically the butt ends of green onions, and we just cut off the part we were going to use for cooking that night, and I brought in the butt ends of them, put them in here, and they're growing. The roots just took hold again. Now, to give you an idea what happens with these roots. The roots go straight down, and you can see that these are pretty long. Because the roots are constantly in the water, you have a bunch of small roots. You don't have like a large taproot like you'd have in the ground. And these are constantly floating in this nutrient-rich, fertilizer-rich water that is constantly being restocked, shall we say, with waste, fish waste in particular, because these fish eat, and as you eat, you produce waste. That's one thing. So it's very nutrient rich that way. And also, just above, you can't see in the frame here, but just above are grow lights that are the same spectrum as the sunlight. So we have artificial lights that are replicating the natural sunlight that these plants would have. So, okay, well, what does that actually look like? What does that actually mean? Let me show you. So now you have the grow lights on, which means that I look like I'm radioactive. But it is fantastic for the plants because they are soaking up all the different spectrum bandwidths, and this leads to a greater rate of photosynthesis. The plants grow faster, the plants grow richer, and it's just a better situation all around for the plants. So, next one, we're going to go right next door to the next grow bed, which doesn't have any plants in it, but is still growing something. It's kind of cool. Hi there. I'm now standing right next to where I just was with the grow bed that has the plants growing in it, with the tomatoes and peppers and the onions and the wheatgrass. And now I'm standing next to the grow bed that doesn't have anything planted in it. I've obviously turned off the grow lights that are just above here so that I don't appear like I'm glowing and radioactive, which would be kind of scary. So instead, what we have growing in here is light that is hitting a nutrient-rich organic material. There is leftover coconut coir in here from previous plantings starting in March. That's when we ripped everything out. And now we have a massive amount of algae, but also this green stuff on the top here is something called duckweed, D-U-C-K-W-E-E-D, duckweed. And duckweed is a waterborne plant that is eaten by a lot of fish, by a lot of herbivores, for them to actually eat. That's their nutrient source, that's their food source. It floats on the water, and it also attaches itself to sort of physical things that are like hard physical things like algae, because as the algae builds up, as the photosynthesis and respiration is occurring, the gas builds up underneath this mat of organic material that was getting all this light, and then it lifted up and it formed this solid mat on top, this solid floating mat on top of the water. Well, the duckweed also gets lifted up with it, and it starts growing on top. So it's this great symbiotic relationship between the algae, between the water, between the fish that are producing it, and also the duckweed. Because all this algae, it's a good thing for us because it was actually sucking up some of the nitrates and some of the nitrogen byproducts of the fish waste, and it was converting it into something that could be used later on. Now, what could it be used for later on? I'm glad you asked that. So this is solid-ish, and it floats on top. Okay. In a normal situation where we didn't have a controlled grow bed environment, there would be fish living underneath here, and they would be eating this on a regular basis. And when all the food was gone, they move on to someplace else that had more food. Well, in this case, there's no fish in here. So it keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. And eventually, it would simply take over the entire bed, and then we'd have to clean it out. Or I could simply clean this out on a little more regular basis in smaller quantities and use it for something good. I think I'll go with that option. This will be fun. This is one of the tanks that we have tilapia in. And you'll notice that they're swarming around, because I'll put my hand out here, and they'll come toward me because they're expecting to be fed. Well, remember that algae I just had? That stuff? Let's see them do some work. So you'll notice that they just devoured this stuff and blew it apart. And if you can see closely enough, now you have a bunch of duckweed floating on top of the water. And what they'll be doing now, and you'll see this occur in a little bit, they're going to come up to the surface and they'll open their mouths. And as they're opening their mouth, they are actually drawing in the water and the duckweed, and then they expel the excess water out through their gills, and they then eat the duckweed. So this is how it works out in the wild as well for surface feeding fish. They come up to the water, they suck in the water that has whatever the food source is, and then they expel the extra water and process the food. Now this is one of 4 tanks that is this size. And with all these fish, they are producing so much waste that we could grow and grow and grow a whole bunch of plants in here and not have any deficiency of fish fertilizer, of fish waste. So when we're in here, you will not need to worry at all about the fish because they are fed and taken care of by Mr. Berman and Mr. Reeser and myself. But they are kind of cool to watch. Just cruising along the top, opening their mouth, sucking in that water. It's kind of cool. Bet you never thought about that, huh? Now, what is a tilapia? A tilapia is not an artificial fish, as some people would say on the internet. Instead, a tilapia is an Asian carp, and they are native to, in most cases, the Nile River region. And they are a freshwater fish that is a follower of the large bovine animals like the hippopotamus. The hippopotamus is an animal that is going to produce a huge amount of waste every time it expels waste. Well, that's organic matter. And if these fish are this excited about algae and duckweed, just imagine how much organic material, how much grass, how much other organic material is going to be passed through a hippopotamus's rear end every time it expels waste. Amplify that by the size of the hippopotamus and how many different members of that hippopotamus family are in the pod. You can imagine how much food there is for these fish to eat. They normally would follow the hippopotamus, and now they are creating a method for us to grow food where we have no land and we can grow it year-round.